Hey guys, it's Paul once again with another VHS review, and this time we are talking about The Spectre of Edgar Allan Poe, made in 1974 and released by Unicorn Video sometime in the mid-80s. Now look at that artwork. Totally gruesome. A bloody axe and a man's face. It's pretty intense, right? There aren't many covers like this out there. Now apparently Unicorn liked it so much that they used it twice. It's also on the back. It's almost identical. The front and back are almost identical. Now, if you read the cover, it says PG, parental guidance suggested. Now, I always thought that was interesting because this is definitely not a PG image. A man with a bloody axe in his face? I don't think so. Definitely not PG material, more like R-rated material. So let's read what the back says. Based on the life of the famed horror suspense novelist, this terrifying film tracks the apparent death of his lover, Lenore, and Poe's attempt to bring her corpse back to life at an insane asylum. Axe murders, decapitations, and grotesque tortures are mixed with madness and gory mayhem in this fearsome film. Now this sounds incredibly gory just from that synopsis, and this cover art talks about decapitations, torture, gory mayhem. Sounds horrific, right? Sounds like a pretty gory flick. But it says PG, parental guidance. This does not sound like a PG movie. It just seems strange that if Unicorn was going to market this movie with an image like this, why would they put PG on the top? It seems kind of strange to me, doesn't it? Now, the movie is bookended by a guy who introduces us to who Poe is, telling us that he was a poet and a little bit about his love life and how he was married to a woman named Virginia. But it takes one of Poe's fictional characters and says that it's true, that he was in fact with this character named Lenore. But of course, the reality is that Lenore never really existed. She was just a character in Poe's works. But this movie creates this new fictionalized account of Edgar Allan Poe and this character, Lenore. Now the story begins with Edgar and Lenore frolicking in the woods. Seems very cheesy and cliche, but then all of a sudden she just seems to pass out in his arms and she suddenly dies for no apparent reason. It then cuts to an interesting title sequence where all the credits are on the ends of books, like the spines of books. I thought that was really interesting because with low budget movies like this, they usually don't get that creative. And from there, we get the funeral of Lenore. And it starts with them lowering her casket into her grave. And one of the people lowering the casket drops it suddenly, and it wakes her up inside the coffin. Now we know she actually is alive. But for about 4 or 5 minutes, this long stretched out funeral scene, she's just hanging out in the coffin. We get a shot of her inside the coffin just laying there, looking around, not saying anything. And the whole time you're just wondering, why isn't she saying anything? It seems really strange. But eventually what happens is that Edgar jumps down in the grave to bid his last farewell, and then she finally screams, and everyone realizes that she is in fact alive. From there, it cuts to a later point where Poe, Lenore, and her doctor are going to a psychiatric hospital where she's going to be staying at. Now, Lenore looks a lot different than she did in the beginning of the movie. Her hair looks white, she looks more pale, she looks more ghostly, I would say. There they meet this doctor who runs the hospital. Later we find out this guy is doing experiments on his patients. Poe and Lenore's doctor stay overnight at the hospital, and then in the night, for whatever reason, Edgar Allan Poe wakes up and starts wandering around the hospital. First, I think it's just to see how Lenore's doing. He goes down to the basement, which is more like a dungeon, and finds one of the crazy people that he's seen earlier, now dead inside his cell. Before he could reach anybody, someone knocks him out. Then he wakes up on a platform surrounded by water and snakes. And then once again, some mysterious man puts him out with chloroform. Later we find out it's the doctor. The doctor puts Poe back in his bed, hoping that, I guess, Poe would wake up in the morning and think it was all a dream. So when the next morning does come, Poe tells this story to Lenore's doctor, telling him about snakes and being abducted and all these things. And Lenore's doctor actually starts to believe him. And now they think that something weird is going on in this hospital. So after they leave the hospital, they go back there that night to snoop around to see exactly what was going on. Now while they're snooping around this hospital trying to find information, the assistant to the doctor is a little nuts himself and lets some of the loonies loose. Now one of the loonies kills a nurse, another one whose name is Lisa, corners Poe and the doctor of the hospital in this weird dungeon where Poe was held earlier, surrounded by all the snakes. Now, she attacks the doctor with this axe, the same axe that you see here on the cover. he falls over a ledge, and we think that he got the axe in the face, but we really never see anything. It's not gruesome, gory, and we think he's dead, but apparently he's not because he wakes up later. Lisa ends up leaving the room after she gets shot by Lenore's doctor. It gets a little bit confusing. And so between these three guys, they're trying to figure out what's going on. Then the doctor of the hospital says she must be going after Lenore. But before Lisa finds Lenore, she encounters the doctor's assistant that had let her loose in the first place. In fact, he's congratulating her and happy that she attacked the doctor, because I guess this assistant had some other motive for letting these crazy people loose. And before he knows it, this patient stabs him in the back and kills him. Not very gruesome or gory. And from there it cuts to Poe trying to find where Lisa went and where Lenore is. And right when he gets to the room, he sees Lisa hacking up Lenore with an axe. Now it's all in shadow, you don't see anything. Now this scene with the axe in the face is not in the movie. The scene where Lisa approaches the assistant and stabs him in the back, right before that, she actually does hit him in the face with an axe. Now, it doesn't look like this. In fact, it feels like they might have cut that footage out of the movie. This might have been censored. Seems like the way this was cut, there might have been more gore in the movie. So, there is no decapitation. There is no bloody torture or gory mayhem or anything of that nature. There might have been at some time, but certainly not the cut of this movie. Definitely no decapitation. There is an axe murder when Lisa starts hacking up Lenore, but you don't see it. There's no blood. It's all in shadow. And that's really how the movie ends. Now, this is an incredibly slow, gothic-type movie, and from the cover here, it is sold as a gory horror movie. Of course, with the cover and the description on the back. So, now the movie was directed by Mohy Quandour, if I'm saying that right. He directed this in 1974. It was his first movie. And for the past 30 years, he hasn't really made any other movies. But all of a sudden, he popped out of the woodwork and started making movies again. Back, I think, in 2010, he started to make stuff again. He actually updated his IMDb page with his resume and pictures. So, it's really interesting that after all these years of not making movies, I think he's been directing, like, documentaries and stuff, but not even those have ended up on IMDb. But in all those years, he finally came back and I think he made a movie on a Facebook romance or something of that nature. So I guess I'd like to see if this ever comes out on DVD. I doubt it. Also in the movie playing Edgar Allan Poe is Robert Walker Jr. He was a big TV star back in the day. He played roles on like every major television show. He wasn't in many movies, but this was one of them. That's the Spectre of Edgar Allan Poe. Now, like I said, it's a very slow movie. It's not perfect. It tried to take some artistic liberty with certain things, and like with the credit sequence, that was interesting, but otherwise, it's a pretty boring movie. There's some weird moments, like Lenore waking up in her casket and not screaming for about 5 minutes. That didn't make much sense. And then it gets kind of confusing with all these characters in this mental asylum. But otherwise, really slow movie. There's not much going for this movie here, except for this artwork, which is really awesome. As far as I know, this was the only time it was released on VHS, although I think IMDb says it was also released in the Netherlands. But it did in fact have a theatrical run. But also what I found interesting on IMDb was that it was banned in Norway, apparently. I can't see why. This movie is so tame. Why would this be banned in Norway? Is that some misinformation on IMDb? I don't know. Before we end this, let me just say that in the back it says that he's trying to bring Lenore back to life at the hospital. But that's not true. You know, from what I understand, it doesn't look like she was ever dead at all. So the synopsis is not only lying about all the gore and decapitations in the film, but it's also lying about the plot. It's kind of misleading us, making us think that Poe is trying to make a zombie out of Lenore, which of course is not true. But so this has been Paul with another VHS review. Look out for more reviews, and I'll see you next time.
The traumatic experience you just witnessed had two effects on Edgar Allan Poe. Within a few short months of the incident, Edgar married a child of 13, namely his cousin, Virginia Clem. It raised some eyebrows in Richmond, and there was a great deal of talk of incest. More importantly, however, from that day on, Edgar Allan Poe became obsessed with death, decay, and madness. All his works thereafter were to reflect these morbid, dark aspects of life. Although the experience left its mark on me, too. As for the beautiful Lenore, he never really forgot her.